Great, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm showered. I have a necklace on, which is the first time my husband was like, wow, a necklace. I was like, yes, I'm bringing out the necklace today. So really thrilled to be here to talk about change management, one of my absolute favorite topics, and specifically creating a growth mindset. And I really loved what Secretary Burns-Wallace mentioned when she talked about the importance of really changing your mindset. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So if we could move to the next slide. Great. So my objectives today are we're going to have a little bit of fun with some brain games. We're going to learn about patterns of human behavior and highlight how a growth mindset can change those behaviors. You know, behavior is just simply how you conduct yourself. The phrase "oh, behave," which I think was popularized by Austin Powers, usually refers to something saucy, shocking, amusing, or suggestive. So I'm not going to be very saucy today, but hopefully this will be informative and amusing and will give you some food for thought and some insights to take forward. Next slide. So I just wanted to give a little bit about me and my background. This is what I call my logo bio. I hail from the hills of West Virginia. I'm very proud of my Irish heritage. I found early on when I was elected, yes, elected as my school mascot, the Patriot, that I had an affinity for driving and influencing behavior. By the way, I was always perplexed by how the boys' fascination was with the cheerleaders when I had a musket and a tri-corner hat, really differentiated myself. But despite that, it paled in comparison to the cheerleaders. My first job was working for Allegheny Power System at Fort Martin Power Station. I was doing some OSHA-related training, and I really loved, again, how training and how you could use training to change behavior. I went to Loyola University where I studied psychology, and then I went on to Johns Hopkins where I got a master's degree in behavioral science. I have been a career consultant working across a number of different clients, both federal and commercial. I'm the proud mother of 3 children, and yes, that is me smiling there with a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and an infant. That pic is about 10 years old. I think I was crying inside. But the next picture you'll see is a creature called the water bear, and that is my spirit animal because the water bear is known to be one of the most adaptable and resilient species in the world, and I really try to live that and be flexible and be resilient, and that's really what change is all about. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Next slide. So over 55 years ago, Bob Dylan sang this song, "For the times they are changing. Come gather around people wherever you roam and admit that the waters around you have grown and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. And if your breath to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing." So we're going to quiz you, see how good your history is. Next slide. What was, and I think we're going to try to use Slido for this. What are the lyrics "The Times Are Changing" about? Global warming, water safety, the civil rights movement, or JFK's assassination?
Hey, Scott, I think you're muted.
Terrible when the studio is muted. So we're going to leave these slides up so people can see them and then just post in chat which you think it is. Don't copy other smart people. Go with your own view. A, global warming. B, water safety. C, civil rights. Or D, JFK's assassination.
All right. Well, it looks like we have some good A students here. I knew you guys weren't average. So the answer is C. And speaking of change, we are certainly in another social justice movement right now. That is a big change and really exciting and an important change in the world. But I'd like to talk about some others. Next slide. So by 2025, they're predicting, according to some economists, that in 5 years, more than 50% of our US workforce will be so-called freelance workers. Next slide. And in case, maybe you've watched the news lately, we are living through a global pandemic. You might have heard about it, all kidding aside. This is a huge change that we're going through right now, a huge shift in behavior. The average person has an attention span of about 8 seconds, which is a second less than a goldfish. So, which means you probably already stopped listening to me right now and I can just stop and go home. But I recently read an article that said that the average focus attention span is 4 minutes on Zoom. So I know we're well into that. So I'm really hoping that you'll stay with me throughout the presentation. Next slide. So yes, change is all around us, and actually I hate that word, change management, because it's almost kind of lost its impact. There's a lot of us saying, like, what is going on right now? What is going on in the world? There's a lot of change. It's constantly happening, and it's a lot. Next slide. So, but when it comes to the workplace, change nothing, nothing changes. And really, at the end of the day, that's the simple truth. Change nothing, nothing changes. It's hard, but if you don't change, the world spins madly on and potentially will leave you flat-footed, or even worse, failing your customers, your constituents, the people that you serve. So let's take a trip back in time. Most Americans over the age of 30, including myself, have fond memories of that logo right there in the top left, Blockbuster. It was well-lit, everything at your fingertips store, unlimited options, unlimited movies. It was a phenomenon, building a network of over 9,000 stores with more than 84,000 employees. And then slowly, and then very quickly, Americans forgot all about Blockbuster. Blockbuster went from this sleek and modern store to basically being defunct in about 3 years, and they declared bankruptcy in 2010, and you probably didn't notice. But what's interesting about that story is that Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix in 2000. And they balked. They were like, no one will want, people like to get out of the house. No one will want to, have this, this streaming option. And they could have bought them for $50 million. And today they're worth over $194 million, more than Disney. So while that's, a story in the commercial world, it's one of my favorite stories because it's about an organization that had the opportunity to change and then didn't. And then the world spun madly on and they were forced to change in a way that they never anticipated. And then there's all these new, these new entrants with Netflix, Blue Apron, Birchbox. If you're not willing to change, the world will force change upon you. Next slide. So why is it so hard? Because change is actually registered as pain in your lizard brain. They've done behavioral studies and change is actually recorded in your brain as pain. So what is your lizard brain? So when new external stimuli such as challenges represented by technology or whatever your driver may be enter the brain, they automatically, or your brain automatically compares it to existing knowledge. And in the very, very primal, the oldest part of your brain, which is the lizard brain, if that new stimuli is inconsistent with what the brain already knows, that working memory, there's a problem. So if it conflicts, then it turns the brain's alarm system on, and that survival mechanism, that fight or flight. So just like a lizard senses a predator, that external stimuli is like, I got to get the heck out of here. You know, that fight or flight instinct is in all of us. And it's often how we respond to change. We see it as a threat. We want to fight it. We want to get away from it. And today we're going to talk about how we change our mindset so that that isn't our immediate instinct. Next slide. So let's take a look at the brain really quickly. The lizard brain is that oldest part. It's actually right there in the brain stem. I think the brain is super cool. I'm a total neuroscience junkie. I read Psychology Today and neuroscience journals often. I just love to understand how we make decisions and how outside influences cause us to move from inaction to action, which is really what change management is all about. But it's a very complex organization, and good change management really appeals to all of it. It's like addressing the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe. You know, it's really appealing to all of those different senses and all of those different components of the brain. So we're going to focus on first on the occipital lobe with a quick exercise. Next slide. All right, what colors are in this dress? A, gold and white, or B, black and royal blue?
So if you post your answers to the chat, but I want to say without doubt it's gold and white. So anybody saying it's not gold and white is wrong. Is that right, Julie?
Well, I'm looking at the chat to see what people say. Black and blue, black and blue.
So the follow-up question that I'm intrigued in is, how certain are people about the colors?
They're very certain about the colors. So moving to the next slide. So this dress, you may have remembered this, became a viral internet sensation in February 2015 when viewers disagreed over the colors. And you talked about how certain, like I did this exercise recently with my 2 teenage boys, and they clearly saw black and blue and were almost incensed when I said that I see it as gold and white. So the bottom line is humans perceive, next slide, humans perceive things differently. Color perception is not in the eye of the beholder. It's actually in the brain. And this is a great example that people perceive things differently. Like the way that you see something is different than the way that I see something, whether it's actual a visual stimuli or even the reaction to change, right? It changes depending on who you're asking. So that's a fact. Keep these facts in mind. We're going to move on to the next. All right, here's another brain game. Here's another example. Do you see a duck or a rabbit in the first image? Do you see an old lady or a young lady in the second image? And why is it that you tend to see a certain image first? So I'm going to ask in the chat, what do you see? Rabbit, duck, both? Young lady, old lady? So this optical illusion has been kind of around for a long time. I see a lot of duck, young lady, duck, young lady. So yeah, so this, you know, perhaps you're in a lake right now and haven't seen a lot of ducks lately. Just like your lizard brain, this is stimuli that you have to process, and the way you process it has to do with individual experiences. And so it has to do with your working memory. Next slide. Fact, experiences and working memory impact how you interpret ambiguity, and often change is ambiguous, which is another reason why change is so hard, because everyone has a different reaction and different experiences to those stimuli, and they rely on their working memory. Maybe they had a really horrific experience with change. Maybe if it's a technology change, maybe their working memory has to do with installing the new TV at home. Your experience is influenced by that working memory. All right, next slide. Read this. By the way, spell check did not like this slide. Read this. I'll give you 30 seconds. All right, so hopefully all of you had a chance to read this. So this is using your parietal lobe, and it's about processing language. And what's interesting is you're able to read this because you are actually making assumptions and predictions based on that working memory and predicting what is next in the sentence and based on that working memory and experience. Next slide. Humans often make predictions about what is to come next, and we do this all the time. You know, when we're faced with a challenge, we anticipate what and make assumptions about what it will be like and what it will mean for us. Next slide. All right, this is the Stroop test. This is a test from 1935 that has to do with your ability to react to incongruent and congruent stimuli. So I'm going to ask you to take 30 seconds and read aloud the color, not the word. You're reading the color aloud to yourself. 30 seconds. Okay. All right, how we do? I see some things in the chat that this was really hard. Yes. Next slide. Why was that so hard? So two things are happening. Your automated process is language. That is the process you're probably most comfortable reading. Like you've been reading since you were in grade school. It's easier to process language than having to process color, and thus you default to that process that is easier. However, I love this example because it shows that given time and practice, you can move away from that default mechanism. You can actually, humans can selectively focus on specific information and ignore other information. So when they've done this Stroop test, when they've done it and repeated it, people are able to more quickly say aloud the color because you actually are creating that working memory and of how to do it and how to deal with that new way of doing things. And people get much faster. Next slide. All right, if I gave you a $100 bill today and you lost it, but then you found another $100 bill, you're walking your dog tonight on the street and you find one, would you A, think I could have had $200, or B, think, wow, I'm breaking even and lucky to have $100? I see lots of B's. So when most people, you guys are an interesting group, when most people, next slide, when most people are confronted with this, they'll say, hey, I could have had $200 because humans have something called loss aversion. We place more value and more focus and more energy on loss than we do on gain. So my husband loves to play poker, has a, typically has a monthly poker night, although that hasn't happened in some time. And boy, when he loses, it is like I hear about that for days. When he wins, it's a good night and he's excited, but it's kind of over in a blip. And that's because humans have this loss aversion, and research has shown that we do place more value on loss than we do on gain. And during change, you're losing the way you've always done something. You're losing that, that working knowledge and working memory, that default process that's easier, that and so you tend to internalize that more. Next slide. And
Julie, as we're transitioning this slide, and we're still fighting over the color of that dress over here in the Richmond studio, we've got 2 minutes of time left on your fast talk.
Okay, so humans perceive things differently. Humans rely heavily on working memory. Humans make predictions, and humans default to what's easiest. So humans are the most adaptable animal on the planet. Next slide. So we have not only a reptilian brain, but a limbic brain and a neocortex, and this has evolved over 10 million years. And so we're really evolved, and we have to fight that primitive tendency and instinct to fight that reptilian brain with our neocortex and our limbic brain. Next slide. So which of these classic stories do you like best? I won't ask this, but Christmas Carol, Hobbit, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, all stories that we know and love. Next slide. So why do we love them? They're stories about self-reflection and human connection. They're stories about bravery and teamwork. They're stories about imagination and diversity of thought. And we love these stories. Next slide. We love these stories, and they're all about growth and transformation, and we love them. Even though these characters are lost and they're on a long journey and they're facing all sorts of horrible obstacles, the little Bilbo Baggins out of the Shire, fighting evil, and Alice falling down the rabbit hole and dealing with this whole cast of wild characters. We love these stories. Next slide. So we have to create pathways, and the reason we love these stories is they're about a journey, but we do not feel comfortable with a journey, always journeying. And so we have to create new pathways. It's like driving. I grew up driving on the back roads in West Virginia. And when you're dealing with change management, it's that first time you're doing something, it's kind of like driving a back road. But the more and more we do something, it's like paving that road. And that's the neuroplasticity of the brain. Our brain can actually create new pathways. That old adage that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, like, it's nonsense. We can create a growth mindset. Next slide. Oh, sorry, you can go through those. So we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We need a growth mindset. Over 65% of Americans have not saved enough for retirement. And what I do today is going to change from what I do tomorrow. And we need to create that culture. So how do we do that? And I know I have like less than 30. You can cut me off if you want. I'll try to wrap it up quickly.
Keep going, keep going.
Next slide, next slide. So what is a growth mindset? A growth mindset is simply just that. It's a mindset that is willing to embrace growth. Failure is an opportunity to grow. They embrace failures, and Secretary Burns Wallace talked about that. You need to not be afraid of the failures. You need to embrace the failures. You need to create a learning culture. So how do you do that? So first, priorities, habits, and systems. You have to prioritize this. The leadership needs to role model this. You have to create messaging campaigns around this. You have to really embed it in your organization as a priority. You want to be a learning organization. You also need to create habits, allow for that risk-taking and innovation, create a culture of feedback where people are not afraid and courageous. I love that Microsoft has a failure of the month club where they actually celebrate their worst failure, the project that was like the worst of the month. They will celebrate that and what they've learned from that. And then the systems is you can embed that growth mindset in your systems, in HR, in your performance evaluations, in the way that you connect with one another, in programs that you support around, creativity. One organization that we work with has directed creativity exercises. So there's just all sorts of ways you can embed this in the organization. Next slide. So I won't go through this, but lots of good findings on the importance of this and the benefits of growth mindset. Other benefits like it delays aging, it reduces anxiety, you learn new things, you improve relationships, it creates and drives trust within an organization and supports innovation. So I'll close with this. When the world changes around you and when it changes against you, what used to be a tailwind is now a headwind, and you have to lean into that and figure out what to do, because complaining isn't a strategy. I love this quote by Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. You know, I think it aligns nicely with Bob Dylan's quote, like, you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are changing. I just want to thank everyone. Sorry it was quick at the end, but I welcome the opportunity. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And I wish you the best of luck in behaving differently. Thank you.